You ever hear the one about the campers at Raven's Hollow? No? Well, grab a seat because it's not just some campfire ghost story. This is the kind of tale that'll make you think twice before ever sleeping in the woods again. But here's the thing. This isn't just a story. It happened to me, to my friends. It all started when my friends and I decided to take a break from our hectic lives. We thought a weekend camping trip would be the perfect escape. Just me, Jamie, Alex, Sam, and Mia. But Raven's Hollow had other plans for us. The drive was pretty uneventful at first, just music blasting and laughter bouncing off the windows. But as we got closer to Raven's Hollow, the vibe changed. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting long, eerie shadows. The road turned bumpy, narrow, and winding, like a serpent leading us deeper into its lair. I remember thinking it looked a bit too secluded, a bit too quiet. Once we arrived, the campsite was perfect. A clearing surrounded by towering trees, their branches intertwining overhead. There was a stillness in the air, a hushed expectancy that sent shivers down my spine. We pitched our tents, the smell of pine and something earthy filling the air. It felt like a postcard, idyllic and serene, but with an undercurrent of something darker. The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange, purple, and blood red. As darkness crept in, we gathered around the fire pit, the flames casting flickering shadows. We roasted marshmallows, trying to ignore the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me. The air grew colder, a damp chill that seeped into our bones despite the warmth of the fire. As the fire crackled and popped, the others continued to laugh and talk, oblivious to the growing sense of dread that had taken root in my stomach. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was out there, lurking just beyond the reach of the firelight. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in the trees and sending a shiver down my spine. It sounded almost like whispers, faint and indistinct, but undeniably there. I strained to make out the words, but they seemed to dance just beyond the edge of my hearing. I glanced around at the others, wondering if they had heard it too, but they were engrossed in their conversation, their faces illuminated by the firelight. Taking a deep breath, I tried to calm my racing heart. We ate our dinner quickly, our appetites waning as the darkness deepened around us. The food, which had smelled so good earlier, now felt like ash in my mouth. Every bite was a struggle, my throat constricting with each swallow. I tried to focus on the conversation, to lose myself in the banter and laughter of my friends, but the feeling of unease persisted, a heavy weight settling in my chest. I wanted to tell the others about what I had seen, but the words caught in my throat. So, I kept my mouth shut, forcing a smile onto my face and pretending that everything was fine. As we cleared away the remnants of our meal, Jamie, ever the optimist, suggested we tell ghost stories. Her eyes sparkled with mischief, but even she couldn't completely mask the tremor in her voice. "You know," she began, her voice hushed. "They say that this place, Raven's Hollow, is haunted. They say that years ago, a group of campers disappeared from this very spot, vanished without a trace." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I glanced around at the others, their faces illuminated by the flickering firelight. Alex shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze darting nervously around the darkened woods. Sam, ever the skeptic, scoffed, but even his usual bravado seemed strained. Mia, her eyes wide with apprehension, leaned closer to the fire. Jamie shrugged, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. The locals say that they were taken by something evil. Jamie's story hung in the air, heavy and cold, like the first breath of winter. It settled over us, silencing the laughter, turning our breath into nervous puffs of smoke that disappeared into the night. Sam, ever the skeptic, tried to lighten the mood. "Come on, Jamie," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too forced. "Don't tell me you believe those old wives' tales." But even Sam couldn't completely dismiss the feeling of unease that had settled over our little campsite. The shadows from the fire danced in the trees, taking on monstrous shapes that seemed to mock our fear. We thought we were smarter, braver, that the darkness held no power over us. As the night wore on, the stories and laughter died down, replaced by a strained silence punctuated by the crackling of the fire and the rustling of leaves. Each time a twig snapped, each time an owl hooted in the distance, my heart would leap into my throat, my eyes darting to the shadows. Later, when the others had finally turned in for the night, I lay in my tent, listening to the sounds of the woods, the chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the wind. Sounds that had seemed almost peaceful earlier now seemed sinister. And then, through it all, I heard it, a low, guttural growl, coming from somewhere deep in the woods. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps crunching on dry leaves. I held my breath, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would be heard over any other sound. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped me, pinning me to my sleeping bag. I wanted to scream, to warn the others, but the sound died in my throat, choked by terror. The footsteps stopped just outside my tent. I could hear the creature breathing, a slow, rasping sound that sent chills down my spine. Then, as abruptly as it had come, it was gone. I lay there for what felt like hours, my heart still racing, my ears straining for any sound that might signal the creature's return. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with nightmares. Images of twisted faces, glowing eyes, and grasping claws haunted my dreams. When morning finally came, it was like waking from a nightmare. The sun, streaming through the trees, seemed to chase away the shadows and the fear that had haunted the night. We exchanged uneasy glances, each of us knowing that something had happened during the night. We tried to shake off the unease from the night before, telling ourselves it was just our imaginations running wild. We packed up our gear and set off on a hike to a nearby lake Jamie knew about. She'd been raving about it, said it was like something out of a fairy tale. We should have turned back then. The birds had gone quiet, their cheerful songs replaced by an unsettling silence. Even the wind, as it whispered through the trees, seemed to carry a warning we were too foolish to heed. The further we hiked, the denser the forest became. We joked about bears and Bigfoot, anything to break the tension. We came across an old abandoned campsite. A tattered tent, its fabric ripped and faded, lay slumped against a fallen log. A rusty lantern hung from a nearby branch, its glass cracked and cobwebbed. The remains of a campfire, the stones blackened with age and neglect, sat cold and lifeless in the center of the clearing. It was as if time had stood still in that place, frozen in a moment of terror and despair. "Let's get out of here," I muttered, my voice barely a whisper. We hurried past the clearing, our eyes darting nervously into the shadows. The woods seemed to press in on us after that, the trees taller, the shadows deeper. I kept hearing noises, a twig snapping, leaves rustling, but when I turned to look, there was never anything there, just the wind, playing tricks on my already frayed nerves. Once I swore I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees watching us. It was tall and skeletal, its limbs too long, too thin, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. But when I blinked, it was gone. "Did you guys see that?" I asked, my voice shaky, my hand instinctively reaching for Alex's arm. He shook his head, his gaze fixed on the spot where I'd seen the figure. "See what?" he asked, his voice strained, but I knew what I had seen. We finally reached the lake, but any sense of relief I might have felt was quickly overshadowed by a growing sense of unease. It was a beautiful spot, the water a deep emerald green, ringed by tall trees that cast long shadows across the surface. But there was a stillness to the air, an unnatural quiet that pressed down on us like a physical weight. The birds were silent, the insects gone, leaving only the soft lapping of the water against the shore. We ate our lunch in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was out there, hidden in the trees, its eyes following our every move. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the lake, a sense of urgency gripped us. We packed up our things, our movements hurried and clumsy, and started back towards the campsite. The woods seemed darker on the way back, the shadows deeper, the air thicker. The silence was broken only by the sound of our own footsteps, unnaturally loud in the stillness. "I don't like this," Jamie whispered, her voice trembling. "I want to go home." Me too, Mia agreed, her eyes wide with fear. We shouldn't be out here in the dark. We're almost back to camp, Alex said, trying to sound reassuring, but I could hear the tremor in his voice. We just need to stick together. But even as he spoke, I could feel it, a presence, dark and malevolent, closing in around us. The woods themselves seemed to be holding their breath, waiting, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that we were no longer alone. The forest floor seemed to rise up to meet us, roots and rocks determined to trip us in the fading light. Each stumble, each gasp for breath, amplified the fear that pulsed through our veins. We were no longer hiking, we were running, though from what, we couldn't say. The sun, a distant memory now, had surrendered to the encroaching darkness, leaving us at the mercy of the shadows. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sounded like footsteps behind us, urging us forward. We need to get back to the clearing, Alex gasped, his breath coming in ragged bursts. There's more light there. He was right. Our campsite, however exposed and vulnerable it felt now, was our only point of reference in this growing nightmare. We had to make it back. We had to outrun whatever was hunting us. But the woods had other plans. The path, which had seemed clear enough on the way in, was now a labyrinth of twisting branches and hidden hollows. We stumbled and tripped, our fear lending a desperate urgency to our movements. Just when the darkness felt absolute, when I was sure we were hopelessly lost, a pinprick of light appeared through the trees. It flickered in the distance, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Look! Mia cried, her voice a mixture of relief and terror. Over there! We surged forward, our exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the face of this unexpected salvation. As we drew closer, the light grew stronger, revealing a clearing ahead. Our campsite. We had made it back. Relief, sweet and intoxicating, washed over me, leaving me weak-kneed and breathless. We stumbled into the clearing, collapsing onto the hard ground beside the smoldering embers of our campfire. For a moment, we just sat there, catching our breath, the silence broken only by the sound of our own ragged breathing and the crackling of the fire. We were safe, at least for now. We huddled closer to the fire, desperate for its warmth, its light, its illusion of safety. But the fear lingered, a bitter taste in the back of my throat. What was that? Jamie whispered, her eyes darting nervously around the clearing. What was chasing us? No one had an answer. We were all too busy catching our breath, too busy trying to convince ourselves that we were safe now, that it was over. It was Alex who broke the silence. He stood up, his face illuminated by the flickering firelight, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond the ring of light. I'm going to check it out, he said, his voice low and determined. See if I can find out what's out there. Alex, no, I cried, grabbing his arm. It's too dangerous. Don't leave the fire. But he shrugged off my hand, his expression resolute. I'll be careful, he said. I won't go far. And with that, he turned and disappeared into the darkness, his flashlight beam a solitary beacon in the night. Time seemed to stand still after Alex disappeared. Every crackle of the fire, every rustle of leaves in the wind, sent a jolt of fear through me. I strained to hear any sign of his return, but the woods were silent, holding their breath. Minutes stretched into an eternity, each one an agonizing reminder of Alex's absence. The fear, which had subsided somewhat when we reached the clearing, returned with a vengeance, coiling in my stomach, constricting my throat. And then, we heard it, a scream, piercing the silence, echoing through the trees. Alex! I screamed, my voice raw with terror. We scrambled to our feet, our eyes searching the darkness, but the woods offered no answers, only a deeper, more profound silence. And then, as if in answer to our unspoken question, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall and skeletal, its limbs impossibly long and thin, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. Its eyes, burning with an eerie internal light, fixed on us, and a cold, predatory smile spread across its face. For a moment, we could only stare, paralyzed by fear, as the creature took a step towards us, then another. It moved with an unnatural grace, its joints creaking softly, like dry leaves rustling in the wind. The smell hit us then, a sickly, sweet, metallic tang that sent a wave of nausea through me. It was the smell of decay, of death, and it clung to the creature like a shroud. Run, I screamed, breaking free from the trance that held us captive, and we ran. We didn't look back. We didn't dare to. We just ran blindly, desperately, our lungs burning, our legs screaming for respite. The creature's laughter, a chilling, high-pitched sound, echoed behind us, urging us on. Our car, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness, materialized through the trees. We scrambled inside, fumbling with the locks, our hands slick with sweat and terror. The engine roared to life, and we lurched forward, tires spitting gravel as we left that godforsaken clearing behind. The engine roared, a comforting symphony of combustion and steel against the symphony of our ragged breaths. We didn't speak, not a single word, as we sped away from Raven's Hollow. The silence inside that rusted SUV was heavy, suffocating almost, but it was a welcome change from the chilling laughter that echoed in our memories. The headlights cut through the darkness, the trees a blur of twisted limbs and grasping shadows. We were leaving the horror behind, but with every mile, the weight of what we'd seen pressed down on us, suffocating us with its reality. We had stared into the face of something ancient and evil, something that defied logic and reason, and we were forever marked by it. I kept waiting for the creature to appear in the rearview mirror, its glowing eyes burning through the darkness, but there was nothing but the receding black void of the forest. Or maybe it was there, hidden in the shadows, watching us, waiting for us to let our guard down. We were safe for now, but the woods had a way of clinging to you, of whispering their secrets into your dreams long after you'd left them behind. The miles stretched on, each one taking us further from the nightmare we'd left behind, but the feeling of dread lingered. The silence in the car was broken only by the occasional sniffle from Mia, who sat huddled in the back seat, her face pale and drawn. I didn't blame her. We'd all been through hell, and it showed. Alex, usually the strong, silent type, kept glancing nervously over his shoulder, his eyes searching the darkness beyond the windows. Jamie, who had been so eager to embrace the adventure of it all, now sat with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the windshield. Sam, ever the skeptic, was the only one who tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. He kept the radio tuned to a pop station, the upbeat music a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that had settled over us. But even he couldn't completely mask the tremor in his voice, the fear that flickered in his eyes whenever he thought no one was looking. We were back in civilization, surrounded by the comforting glow of streetlights and the sounds of traffic, but it felt alien, unreal. It was as if we'd stepped into another dimension, one where the darkness of Raven's Hollow had no power. We didn't talk about that night, not really. We couldn't. It was like trying to describe a dream, the details slipping away like sand through your fingers, leaving behind only a residue of fear and the unshakable feeling that we had been forever changed by our encounter with the unknown. We tried to move on, to put it all behind us, but the memories lingered. They surfaced in our dreams, in the shadows at the edge of our vision, in the sudden silences that punctuated our conversations. Sometimes when I was alone, I could almost hear the whispers again, carried on the wind, weaving their way into my thoughts. They were faint, almost indistinguishable from the normal sounds of the city, but they were there, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the veil of reality. I started avoiding wooded areas, the shadows between buildings at night. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a floorboard sent a shiver down my spine. I was a prisoner in my own mind, haunted by the memory of something I couldn't explain, couldn't outrun. We drifted apart after that weekend. The shared trauma of that night, the unspoken fear that lingered between us, created a distance that no amount of forced laughter or shared memories could bridge. We tried to stay in touch, to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but the conversations were strained, the silences heavy with unspoken words. It was as if we were all afraid to say too much, to risk shattering the fragile illusion of normalcy we'd each so carefully constructed around ourselves. Eventually, the phone calls stopped. The texts went unanswered. We were like ships passing in the night, each of us sailing on a different course, forever haunted by the memory of the storm we'd weathered together. I often wondered if they still heard the whispers, if they still saw the shadows moving at the edge of their vision, or maybe they had found a way to forget, to bury the memories so deep that even the darkness couldn't reach them. It's been years since that night at Raven's Hollow, but the memory still haunts me. I can still see the creature's glowing eyes, still feel the icy grip of fear that paralyzed me. I've never been camping again. I can't even look at a forest without feeling a shiver of primal terror run down my spine. The city, with its noise and its crowds, feels like the only safe haven. Sometimes I wonder if we were meant to escape, if our survival was just a cruel joke, a way for the entity to extend its reach beyond the confines of those woods. Maybe it wanted us to remember, to spread the fear, to serve as a warning to others foolish enough to venture into its domain. Or maybe, just maybe, it's still out there, waiting for us to let our guard down, to return to the darkness that claimed a part of us that night. And that's the thought that keeps me awake at night, the fear that whispers in my ear, reminding me that some places are best left undisturbed, some secrets better left buried. Because the woods remember, and sometimes they come looking for what they've lost.